Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play Castlevania Circle of the Moon. In the last part we accessed the Royal Chamber after finishing our duties over in the Machine Tower, and now I'm quickly farming out the bloody swords that are just outside of the save point right here to get the DSS card from them I mentioned I would get last time. This took about 28 or so bloody swords right here, so counting the 7 or so I farmed near the end of last part in the one hidden room, this was about 35 total bloody swords just farming for the Mars card there. So the Mars card can be very fun, especially if you find that Nathan's basic attack range is just leaving a lot to be desired. What it does is, depending on the attribute combo, is that it actively changes Nathan's weapon to other weapons. Namely, going down the line of attribute cards we have at the moment. With Mercury, it's a slower fire sword. With Serpent, it's a faster ice sword. With Mandragora, it's a vine sword that's very wide, but has petals that it sends out that do lower damage. With Golem, it's a very wide but very slow hammer that notably only does damage at the edge of the hammer. The shaft that you hold it by does nothing. With Cockatrice, it's a pair of tonfas that can stone enemies, and with Manticore, you get poison elemental punches. In the right hands, each of these can be very useful and actively do lend themselves into other playstyles. Heck, when I was actively going through Magician mode for the trophy on the Castlevania Advance collection, the Petal Sword was my best friend in early game, and the tonfas were my best friend in mid game. Although, as I've learned since, Magician mode's actively the fastest way to play this game if you do specific tricks. Specifically, the current world record for this game is any percent in 3 minutes and 15 seconds on Magician mode, because they figured out a trick where you can actually use a specific DSS combo to glitch into a wall during a screen transition and zip up into the final boss's arena and then just beat the game from there in a very specific, optimal, but very luck-reliant way. We got a new enemy type here, the Were-Panther. These guys are a little bit tricky in that they actively dash to do their attack at you from certain distances, and the moment they detect you're attacking, they try to leap away from you. So you need to kind of get them in a moment when they're cooling down after their attack to capitalize properly. Their common drop isn't anything too notable in that it's the basic wristband we've been creating since part 1 pretty much. But their rare drop is something we want to farm for, as they can drop our next DSS card. With that said, it is a rare drop at a 1.1% base drop rate. Mind you, looking at the luck formula at the moment, with my current luck stat, which I believe is about 300, yeah, exactly 300 even, that becomes more of like a 3% drop rate, which is a lot more fair of a farm, ultimately. So the room I just entered and left, there is, I believe, an MP max up in there for us that I can technically grab right now, but I ultimately wait until later since I need to come back to this area later on anyway. If I had used either the DSS combos that allow me to freeze enemies before killing them or stone them before killing them, I actively could have just climbed those bloody swords in there to get up there, but that's not worth my time in my eyes because I already don't like dealing with bloody swords too much, as I've already mentioned. Now, I already picked on back during the Machine Tower that I really don't like how this game makes anything that's not a stat max up pretty much locked behind farming an enemy, be it DSS cards or, you know, any basic armor upgrades. But I am glad that pretty much any single enemy that has a drop that's really worth it, be a DSS card or otherwise, is at least in a hidden room somewhere that you can more easily farm it. Or at the very least, if they're not in those situations, there's enough of them in a room in a row where you can farm it reliably. Also, I didn't even mention this when we first saw the Gorgons back in the Eternal Corridor, but yeah, they can petrify you. Petrification here, I think, works pretty much the same way it did in Symphony, where it does last for a good while, but you can actively get out of it yourself by just mashing the D-pad enough. I'm not sure how long it takes to get out of it otherwise, though. What I can't recall about getting petrified in this specific game is if it still has the same added effect it had in Symphony of the Night, where your defense while petrified might as well be turned to 0 because you just take incredibly increased damage. I know there's another similar status symbol in this game that still has that effect, but I can't remember if Petrify still does, so future me, if you can go test that specifically, that'd be nice. Now, depending on the order you're actually exploring the castle in a first playthrough, you might find yourself specifically up to this room earlier than I have. But as you might have just seen, you're not getting past this room unless you have the kicking boots. Admittedly, something I've really realized over the years about Castlevania compared to Metroid, at least in this specific genre, is that largely Castlevania, if you find the right order to do things in, you can get most areas like 90 to 95% cleaned up on the first run, and then you have to go back for like 5% of the map or items that are stragglers later on from some ability you don't have. Meanwhile, in Metroid, you're only fully completing 1 out of maybe every 6 areas on the first visit, just due to A, usually the level designs of a Metroid area outright are a little more interconnected with more passageways connecting areas, and B, Metroid's generally higher amount of individual weapons or movement utilities means there's just more layers for you to sift through in the case you're actively trying to get all the items done. Mind you, some of those layers to peel away as you get new abilities are actively pretty paper thin, as you might be getting another ability on the way back out of an area and things like that. It also kind of depends on the game, because, like, I'd say getting most items along the way in, like, Super Metroid's pretty easy. But especially the way that they interact with power bombs, starting specifically in Zero Mission, means you're doing a much more heavier backtrack, because there's usually a lot of power bombs in each area you can't get until way late game. And what's weird to me now is, we both have Dread and Prime 4 out now. Both of those games also have that same issue still, albeit at different levels. Because Dread's a lot more guilty of it than I think Prime 4 is. And I just kind of wonder, do they want to save the power bomb for less because they think it's too powerful, or do they just don't want people spamming it and getting their ears blown out, depending on what the game is? I don't know. Power bombs, you frustrate me nowadays, and that's sad because you were fine in Super and Fusion. And you know what, generally same deal on Prime 1 and 2 as well. Prime 3, a little bit different there, but that's just because Prime 3 had a lot of different little mechanics going on. By the way, we're talking too much about the wrong end of the Metroidvania spectrum here, aren't we? So, Chapel Tower does kind of showcase one thing I'm not the biggest fan of in Circle of the Moon, and not for nothing, a lot of the other Metroidvania Castlevanias, in that when they usually have very large rooms on their maps, either they're very empty with nothing of real interest to them, or they're mazes that you have to find your way warming back and forth in, also with not much of value in them. But not for nothing, I think even the devs themselves kind of realized that as they went, because the later into this side of the series you get, the less rooms of this size tend to appear unless they're doing something very specific with them. Usually either as some sort of large boss room, or if it's meant to be a very specific set piece within the castle in question, like one specific set of 2 rooms in Harmony of Dissonance, or a similar set of rooms actually in Portrait of Ruin. So, a moment ago, my 3rd or 4th Where Panther I've Fought period actively did drop their DSS card. Worth noting, that has a drop rate of around 1.1% at base, so I got really, really lucky there. That is the Thunderbird card, which is your Electric Elemental Attribute card. When paired with the Mars card, Nathan's whip is replaced by a martial arts combo, namely 2 punches, a 3rd punch, and then a kick in order. It does do lower damage per shot and has pretty pathetic range, but the full martial arts combo comes out fast and does do more damage across the entirety of it than most other weapon shifts. When paired with the Jupiter card, Nathan suffers heavy knockback from every attack. But in doing so, it also reduces all damage he intakes by half, so in some cases it can actively really help you with your survivability. The Venus combo increases Nathan's strength stat by a value based on how much of the map you've uncovered up to the 100% mark, which obviously makes it very good for boss fights as you go through the game. The Mercury combo, on the other hand, is a little bit odd. I think it does increase your damage and range slightly, but its most noticeable effect is that it changes your whip spin into an electrified version of itself. I've read that it does less damage the longer you hold it out, but I've actively never really tested that, because frankly I seldom use the whip spin or this specific Mercury card combo. Make sure you actively use that save point, by the way, because we are coming up on the Chapel Tower's boss fight, and this can be one of the more annoying ones, frankly. Oh, hi! Hugh! You okay? You, back off. This is my trophy to claim. Hugh! I got this. Boss of the Chapel Tower is Adramelech. We got 1,800 health to worm through here, but thankfully his head is a large enough target where things like the cross boomerang could get multiple hits in a row, making that 1,800 go by pretty quickly. Everything this boss can throw at you is projectile-based. To start, the area below his head is pretty much always littered with spawning purple bubbles, which can be annoying to weave around. Thankfully, any attack you throw out can destroy them. He can spawn in waves of skulls around either of his hands that will then dive in an arc towards the opposite side of the room. That can be avoided by hugging the wall on the side they spawn in on, I believe, but I tend to ignore it. The final attack this guy can throw out is summoning 8 flames that will then be aimed at your current position. Keeping yourself moving in some form should help you get around this as well. This can be a very threatening looking boss, and it is very easy to take hits here, but if you bring in a good sub-weapon or have a good DSS combo that can target mid-air enemies like the cross boomerang or otherwise, ultimately a pretty easy fight at the end of the day. Ew. I don't like how the neck stump's bubbling. I'm going to leave now. So worth noting, the Chapel Tower itself doesn't actively have a movement utility locked behind its walls. It instead has this switch that, when pressed, destroys all the Iron Maidens located throughout the castle that we've been seeing since our first venture into the Abyss Stairway. This has actively opened up 2 whole new areas for us, one of which is near our current location actually, the other which is over back near the Abyss Stairway that frankly you really should not tackle yet. Damn, Who asked you for help? I couldn't just leave you, could I? Don't think that you defeated it. It was the power of that whip. Hugh, you could never beat me in training. Never once! But Father named you the successor and gave you the Hunter Whip. Your parents and my father banished Dracula together, and those fond memories clouded his judgment. Don't forget that. Man, you've just been an asshole since we got in here. With that said, barring some odd tiles I haven't grabbed in Adramelech's boss room, about to grab in a moment in the speed-up section, our duties here in the Royal Chapel are completed for now. There are still some items here alongside a very notable side pathway we'll need to take later on, but we can't do either of those things until we have either one of or both of the next key items as it is. So we're just going to leave for now and get back to where we need to go next. As for our next destination, we want to go through one of the passageways that was hidden behind one of those Iron Maidens we've now destroyed. But it's one I did not show off earlier. Specifically, it's on the eastern end of the Eternal Corridor, just to the left of a heart max-up I got last part. I even mentioned there was a passageway there at the time, if memory serves, but I didn't show it off because I knew I wouldn't be able to do much over there. Also, you're seeing it a little bit here in the speed up, but the Adramelech boss fight's a little bit special, and it's the first boss fight we faced, I believe, that actively does change what enemies spawn in certain rooms. Namely, we were dealing with flame armors in here on the way in, but now those have been replaced by thunder armors that are much more annoying for me to fight. Their main thing is that when they swing their sword, it does damage, of course, but they also spawn in a humming electric projectile. And depending on how you move yourself, you can get like 2 or 3 of these guys on screen at once, and dodging all those projectiles can be a real pain. But they did drop the gold armor, which, hey, I'll take that notable upgrade. That's another 30 defense up on top of what I have. Before we beeline it to our next destination, though, I do want to take a moment to explore the room that's coming up here, though, that we went through on the way into the Royal Chapel, namely this little green room. I mostly want to do so because there's some stat max-ups here, but also directly below me right now is actively our next warp room, so now we have a shortcut to the far eastern side of the castle, which, hey, I'm never going to say no to. While we're here, though, we are going to get treated to one of my favorite things that a game in this genre can do, depending on their level design. The taunting of a later area. Because just below that save point is another passageway to the east that leads us to an area we're not going to be able to do anything in from this side. This is the underground waterway. This area can actively be accessed from its front right now since we destroyed the Iron Maidens, but that's the area I recommend you really don't tackle right now, as A, no matter what, you're going to be underleveled if you go in there right now. Enemies are just going to do ridiculous damage to you. But also, if you go there right now, something else besides the enemies will be draining your health pretty quickly that frankly just makes it not worth actively accessing. One more stat max up to go for before we actively go after our next destination, but worth noting, the skeleton boomerang I just killed, this is actually one of the best places in the game to farm them for their rare drop in the case you want to. Namely, they have a 1% chance at base to drop their rare drop, which is the stylish suit. There's actively 2 other enemies that can drop that, namely the heat shades we saw back at the machine tower alongside an enemy in the next area. But if you get that as soon as you physically can, it actually is a pretty decent defense upgrade because it boosts your defense by 40 alongside your strength by 10. Making it honestly a pretty good choice for most builds. In fact, actually, on that note, I should probably mention, I've mentioned before that Magician mode is my favorite way to play this game in specific because I have all the DSS cards by default. What's really funny, though, is that mode, like I mentioned, boosts your MP and your intellect, so you can cast spells as regularly as you can. The thing is about the way that stat layouts in this game work is that all damage you deal is based on your strength, even if it's from a spell. So even in the mode where you have absurd MP and intellect, you want to actually focus on boosting your strength stat to do as much damage as possible, which can feel kind of silly at times, I won't lie. Just past these last few beast demons and gorgons lies the pit that leads toward the heart max-up was that we mentioned earlier, and thus the entrance to our next area. And honestly, on our first playthrough, this was probably my least favorite area of the game. Welcome to the Underground Gallery. And I love the music here. This is a remix of Aquarius from Castlevania 3, and it's probably overall my favorite version of that song because I think it just fits the sound font really well. If this isn't my favorite version of the song, it's probably the version from the Famicom release with the extra VRC6 sound channels, though the version of it from Smash was also pretty good. Speaking of music, though, I know FutureMe's probably already corrected this, but in a prior part during, I think, the Machine Tower specifically, I mentioned this game had a few remixes for its music. There's actively way more than I remembered at the time in the game. Namely, either usually from Castlevania 3, as we've seen a few times already, But there's also some from Castlevania Bloodlines on the Genesis. Heck, Castlevania 3's Game Over theme is actively used as a boss theme here a couple times. And the theme that plays in the audience chamber and Abyss Stairway areas, among some others, is actively the sinking old sanctuary that played in the second stage from Bloodlines. I wouldn't be surprised if the main reason I just didn't associate those remixes with what I was talking about at the time is largely just that they're not songs I'm as familiar with. Because while I've played each of those games several times, when I think of Castlevania music, I'm either thinking of obviously Vampire Killer, Beginning, Theme of Simon, certain Clock Tower themes and all that, Bloody Tears, or I'm thinking about certain songs like A Serenade to Sympathy or I Am the Wind, or just, the entirety of Symphony and Aria's soundtracks in general, because those are easily the two games in the series I've played the most. Either way, while we're here in the Underground Gallery, worth noting the harpies that are here right on this screen are actually the other enemy that can drop that stylish suit item I was talking about earlier if you want to try and farm that out. For both them and the Heat Shade enemy, they can also drop it as their common drop, so it's roughly a 2.5% chance at base. The thing about harpies you might want to farm out more actively, though, is their rare drop, which is the Star Bracelet. There's enemies that drop them more often down the line. The harpy, I think, only has a 0.8% chance of dropping it. What the Star Bracelets do is that they actively give you different buffs whether or not it's equipped to your left or right arm. On the right arm, it's Strength and Intelligence plus 25. On the left arm, it's Defense and Luck plus 25. And stacking two of those can actually be a really good strategy for the mid-game if you can manage to get them. Also worth noting are the Imp enemies, the ones that are about half Nathan's size. They have a very high 20% base chance for their common drop to show up, which is the Salamander card in the case you somehow avoided getting one from the Skeleton Bombers across the game thus far. Also worth noting is their rare drop, the Spiced Meat. Any one of those you can grab, hold on to them for later because they're pretty useful. They are a healing item that restores Nathan's HP by 100, which is pretty good, but they're also exceedingly rare from every enemy that drops them, but especially from the Imps. The Imps have a 0.25% chance to drop them, which is just not worth farming. Also worth noting are two other new enemies here, the King Moth and the Death Mantis. The King Moth can poison you with its little projectile attack, but you have a very good chance of getting an antidote from them to cure that poison, because it's their common drop at a 3% drop rate. So you can find that pretty regularly. The Death Mantis isn't too much to know because it does move slowly and has pretty small range. But depending on what you've done thus far, you might want to farm them for a DSS card, as their rare drop is the same Cockatrice card that we got from the Stone Armors, albeit Death Mantises drop it less often. They have a 1.5% chance at base to drop the Cockatrice card, whereas the Stone Armors had a 1.8% chance. They can also drop the same hard ring those Stone Armors could, so if you want to get a potentially decent defense boost at the cost of some strength and luck, you could do worse, honestly. But right now, as I'm fighting through these hallways, let's talk some more about the game's dev team. Next up to bat to talk about is Yoshiki Domae, who is this game's other system programmer alongside programming the bosses on top of some enemies. They have many games in common with people we've mentioned thus far, like being a programmer on Beat Mania and popping music for the Game Boy Color. But after Circle of the Moon, they went down some paths we haven't seen thus far in this dev staff. Notably, they were a programmer on nearly every Disney sports game that Konami put out on the Game Boy Advance throughout 2002 and 2003. They were a programmer on Me and My Katamari as well as Tekken 6 for the PSP. They were a programmer for both versions of Smash 4. They were a graphical programmer for I Am Setsuna. They were director, producer, and a technical advisor on those recent Baten Kaitos remasters. And their most recent credit is as a core library programmer on Ninja Gaiden 4. Based on how varied that resume is, I'm assuming either they're freelance or they work for a game studio that's along the lines of what Tosei is, where while they do put out their own games here and again, they're largely there to be supporting devs for other companies that just don't usually get credited as directly. Along similar lines, this game's other enemy programmer was Masaki Morimoto. They seemingly started as a programmer on Castlevania 64 alongside Legacy of Darkness, doing enemy programming for both, alongside other tasks like field programming or demo programming. After Circle of the Moon, they largely worked on sports games as far as I can find for the rest of their resume, like ESPN X Games Skateboarding, Evolution Skateboarding, U-Move Super Sports, and MLB Power Pros both in 2007 and 2008, all those games for the PlayStation 2 in specific. Here we meet one of my least favorite enemies in the game, the Killer Bees. These guys make a beeline for you, pardon the pun, if you get too close and will poison you upon contact. But due to their speed alongside Nathan's own attack speed, they're very likely to hit you and just poison you outright. With that said, similarly to the King mods, they do have a very good chance, roughly a 3% base drop rate, of dropping the same antidotes. So at the very least, you're likely to get a cure for the poison from them directly. They're also one of the other enemies that dropped the Night Suit we talked about that the Hyenas also dropped. With that said, they drop it even more rarely, as while the Hyenas have a roughly 0.5% chance at base to drop it, Killer Bees have an astonishingly low 0.2% chance at base to drop it. Not worth the farm. And the sad thing is, the final enemy that drops it that has the highest chance to drop it is late enough in the game where there's going to be other armors that outclass it, so the Hyena in the one room in the Royal Chapel probably is going to be your best bet if you want to get the Knight suit at a point where it's really reliable. In that same room was also the Man-Eater enemy type, the big plant guys. They can be kind of annoying, but they also leave themselves very open from below when doing their bullet seed attack. A good Fire Sword, Mars, Salamander, DSS combo, and you're going to be in good shape. We want to farm them eventually, as while their common drop is the usual heart restorative item, their rare drop is another new DSS card for us. Decently rare though at a base 1.5 chance to drop per kill. There's a much better place to farm them later on in the area. I forget if I do so before the boss fight or after it, but I do it in the very near future. As with multiple enemies we've seen thus far, one of your best friends here is actively the cross boomerang subweapon. As if you place it just right as you saw a moment ago, you can get like 3 or 4 shots in on them at once while they're just not able to move at all. They do slowly march forward, which is actually very easy to miss if you're entirely focusing on attacks. But as long as you keep some distance, you should be fine, and even then they don't do too much damage on contact if you have a decent armor at this point in the game. The underground gallery isn't that large of an area, ultimately, especially with the rooms we can only explore at this point. But you'd be surprised how much damage you can take here, especially if you're someone like me that tends to either just fight through the poison status ailment or forget that I have it entirely. Because that can really drain your health pretty quickly, as you were seeing there a moment ago. In fact, most times I find myself coming back to this game. At this point, I usually just end up blitzing through the enemies to get to the save point right before the boss fight, because my HP is getting critically low and I usually don't have many healing items that I want to waste at that point in time, at the least. Oh, also, while we are coming up at the end of the part, worth noting, we saw the poison armor enemy a moment ago, and there's another one coming up here in the next room. They actively have a very low, like a 0.5% chance, I think, to drop the rainbow robe armor for Nathan. If you're willing to put in the time, that could last you for most of the remainder of the game, if not the rest of it. It boosts your defense by 140, your intellect by 250, and your luck by 15, which is a really nice round package in my eyes. But with that, I'm going to need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in part 6, we're going to finish off our time here in the Underground Gallery before adventuring on to our next destination. See you guys then.